My father-in-law, the boss, had no idea. I secretly owned 81% of the company. He tried to fire me in front of my wife. I stayed quiet, then calmly said, "No, actually, your role is eliminated." Their faces changed instantly. My name is Ryan Carter, and I never thought the people I trusted the most would be the ones who tried to destroy me. It still feels strange saying that out loud, because betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from people you eat dinner with, people you celebrate birthdays with, people you believe will protect you. But life has a way of showing you the truth at the exact moment you least expect it. Let me ask you something before I begin. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize later that they were smiling at you while planning your downfall? Because that's exactly what happened to me. It was a normal Tuesday morning, or at least, it looked normal. I walked into the conference room, holding my coffee, ready for what I thought was a routine meeting. The hallway smelled like fresh paint because renovations were happening. The office was quiet, except for the soft tapping sounds from keyboards outside. But the moment I stepped inside the conference room, something felt wrong. My father-in-law, Richard Foster, was already seated at the head of the table. He wore one of those expensive navy blue suits, the kind that looks sharp but feels cold. His posture was straight, stiff. I almost rehearsed. His expression was blank, but his eyes, they were sharp, calculated. Next to him sat my wife, Ava, my Ava, or at least, the version of her I thought she was. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't warm. She wasn't the woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder while watching movies. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and she kept glancing at the table, not at me, as if looking into my eyes would make her feel guilty. Around the conference table were a few board members, the HR manager, and a lawyer I had never seen before. The air felt heavy. Too heavy. Something was coming. I sat down slowly, placing my notebook on the table. Nobody said a word. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. His voice was cold, sharp, almost emotionless. "Ryan, thank you for coming." There was no warmth, no respect, just distance. I nodded. "Of course. What's this meeting about?" Richard didn't answer with words first. Instead, he slid a white envelope across the polished wooden table. The paper made a soft scraping sound against the surface. That sound still rings in my head. Ava exhaled, but not the way someone relieved would. It was the kind of breath someone takes when they've been holding a secret too long. Richard leaned back in his chair and said, "Ryan, your role has been eliminated, effective immediately." My hand stopped halfway to the envelope. For a moment, everything inside me went quiet, like my heart forgot it needed to beat. I looked at him. "What?" I asked softly. Not angry, not confused, just trying to make sure I heard him correctly. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. "Your position is no longer necessary," he continued. "Pack your things. Security will walk you out." My wife still wouldn't look at me. I scanned the faces around the table. Some people looked away. Others stared at their papers. No one defended me. No one questioned him. It was done. In their minds, I was erased. But here's the part that made me smile. They had no idea what was coming. Because Richard believed he owned this company. He believed he controlled everything. He believed I was just the quiet guy who married his daughter. Someone lucky to have a job he didn't deserve. Someone replaceable. Someone small. But the truth? I wasn't just an employee. I owned 81% of the shares. Shares he signed over years ago, when the company was in serious debt, and he needed anyone to invest. Back then, I believed in him. I believed in the company. I believed in family. So I invested everything I had. Richard signed the papers without a second thought because he assumed I would never matter enough to use them. He forgot something simple. Paper doesn't lie even when people do. So instead of reacting with anger, I slowly picked up the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a printed termination letter with the company logo at the top, crisp, clean, heartless. I read every line carefully. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. When I finished, I closed the envelope gently, like someone closing a book they already knew the ending of. Then, I smiled. Not because it was funny, not because I enjoyed the moment, but because the mask on their faces was about to fall apart. Richard frowned. "What's funny?" he asked. His tone was irritated now, like he expected fear or anger, not a smile. Ava finally looked up, her brows pulled together, confused. I placed the envelope back on the table. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder, one I never planned to use unless I had to. Their eyes followed my hand. I opened the folder, and slid a document toward Richard the same way he slid mine. The table went silent. So silent, I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard's voice softened. Unsure. What is this? I leaned back, mirroring his earlier posture, and said calmly, Actually, Richard, your role has been eliminated. Ava's eyes widened. The lawyer at the end of the table froze. Richard blinked once, twice as if his brain refused to process the words. What do you mean? He stuttered. I gently tapped the document with my finger. That, I said quietly, is proof that I own 81% of the company, and as majority owner, I'm terminating you. At that moment, every ounce of arrogance drained from his face. And my wife? That confident smirk she walked in with? Gone. Completely gone. Absolutely continuing the story from where it left off. Richard stared at the document as if it were written in another language. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. I watched him calmly the way someone watches a glass slowly slide toward the edge of a table, knowing it will fall no matter what. Finally, he spoke. You're joking, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I'm not. The room stayed dead silent. Everyone was frozen. Ava finally found her voice. Ryan, what are you talking about? My father. I cut her off gently, but firmly. Ava, your father signed these shares over to me 7 years ago. Her eyes widened. No, he wouldn't do that. I turned the document so she could read the signature at the bottom. Her face drained of color, because it wasn't just a signature. It was notarized, stamped, filed, legal. She swallowed hard. But why didn't you say anything before? I took a slow breath. Because I trusted you both. I trusted the idea of family. I believed a company built together should run together. My voice softened. But today, you showed me what you truly believe. Her jaw tightened, and she crossed her arms again, defensive, stubborn. This is petty. You could have discussed this privately. I let out a small, tired laugh. This wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Mr. Foster, he said cautiously to Richard. If this document is legitimate, Richard slammed his palm onto the table. It's impossible, he snapped. There's no way this kid owns my company. I looked at him, calm, almost emotionless. Richard, the company was failing. Banks wouldn't touch it. Investors laughed you out of meetings. I paused. And you needed someone you could manipulate, someone loyal, someone who wouldn't question you. His shoulders stiffened. So yes, I continued. You signed everything over because you thought I would never use it. His silence confirmed the truth. Then something unexpected happened. Richard's tone changed. It wasn't anger now. It was fear. Ryan, he said, forcing a smile. Listen, maybe we started this meeting wrong. Let's talk. We don't have to make decisions like this. I leaned forward slightly. You already made the decision. You already handed me my farewell letter. You already arranged security. I pointed toward the door where 2 guards waited. You made it public. You made it humiliating. You made it official. His smile collapsed. Then he tried a different angle. Think about Ava, he whispered, lowering his voice. Think about your marriage. Ava nodded quickly, desperation replacing confidence. Yes, Ryan, we're family. We don't have to do this. I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes didn't hold love, or regret, or fear of losing me. They held fear of losing power, lifestyle, control. And in that moment, I realized something painful. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing what came with me. I exhaled slowly and stood up from my chair. Everyone watched as I gathered the folder and placed it neatly back in my briefcase. Then I walked toward the head of the table, Richard's seat, and placed my hand on the back of the chair. His eyes widened. No, he whispered, but I didn't sit yet. Instead, I looked at the HR manager, Qley. Her voice was shaky. Yes? I nodded. Please draft immediate termination documents for Richard Foster. Title removal, building access revoked, and severance package denied. She blinked. Denied? I nodded once. Yes. The attempt to fire a majority owner constitutes grounds for misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed. Richard lunged forward. You can't do this. I finally sat down in his chair in complete silence. Then I folded my hands and looked him dead in the eye. Richard, I already did. Ava stood up suddenly. This is insane, she shouted. You're ruining everything. Do you really think power makes you right? I looked at her calmly. No, but honesty does. Loyalty does. Respect does. Her expression twisted. And what about love? It was the first time the room felt emotional, not corporate. I paused before answering. Love doesn't fire you in front of strangers. Love doesn't plan behind your back. Love doesn't watch quietly while someone tries to erase you. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Richard tried one last desperate move. He pointed at me and said, "You're making a mistake. You will regret this." I stared at him, steady, controlled. "No," I said softly. "The only mistake I made was trusting the wrong people." Security stepped forward. This time for him. Richard tried to pull his arm away, but age and panic made him weak. As they escorted him out, he kept looking back, not in anger now, in disbelief, in loss, in humiliation. Ava watched her father leave, and then she turned back to me with trembling hands. "Ryan, please, we can fix this. We can talk. Don't throw our marriage away." I looked into her eyes, the same ones I once loved so deeply. "It wasn't me who threw it away," I whispered. "It was you. The moment you picked a side, and it wasn't mine." Her face fell. She sat back down slowly, as if realizing the world she built was collapsing in real time. And that day, everything changed. Not just the company, not just the power dynamic, but me. Because sometimes, you don't become stronger until you're forced to stand alone. After the meeting ended, people slowly started leaving the room, silent, tense, unsure what to say. No one made eye contact, not because they hated me, but because they didn't know whose side they should fear more. Power changes the way people look at you. Before, I was just the quiet son-in-law. Now, I was the majority owner, and the reality of that made everyone walk differently around me. Ava stayed seated. She looked smaller now, not physically, but emotionally, like her confidence had been peeled away layer by layer. She finally spoke. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was shaky, soft. "Ryan, can we talk? Privately?" I didn't say yes. I just stood, grabbed the envelope they tried to fire me with, and walked toward the door. She followed close behind. We stepped into my office, or rather the office Richard always pretended belonged solely to him. Ava closed the door behind us. The room felt colder than usual. The light from the large window fell across the floor, and dust floated in the air like tiny reminders of how long I had ignored the warning signs. Ava took a deep breath. "Ryan, I need you to understand something." Her tone changed, softer, gentle, rehearsed. "My father didn't mean to hurt you. He just..." I lifted my hand slightly, stopping her. "Ava, don't defend him. Not now." She blinked. "I'm not defending him," she insisted. "I'm trying to explain." I sat down on the couch and let her speak. She walked back and forth a little nervous, then finally said, "My father only did this because he thinks you're not capable of leading alone. He thought, maybe if he took control, you'd feel relieved." A humorless laugh escaped my mouth. "Relieved?" She nodded quickly, desperate for agreement. "Yes. You've been stressed, Ryan. You barely sleep. You barely talk." Dad was worried. I leaned forward. "So his solution was to fire me?" She swallowed. "It was temporary. He was going to bring you back once things were stable." My jaw tightened. "So let me get this straight. You were planning to dethrone me, then hand me back my business like a dog who learned manners." She didn't answer, because the truth was already obvious. I looked her directly in the eyes. "Tell me the truth, Ava. Did you know about the termination before the meeting?" Silence. She blinked rapidly. Then, a tear rolled down her cheek. Yes. I nodded slowly, not surprised, not angry, just finally aware. "How long have you known?" My voice was steady. She whispered, "A month." That hit harder than the envelope. A month. A month of sleeping beside me. A month of kissing me goodnight. A month of pretending we were a team. I spoke quietly. "And you didn't say a word." Her shoulders shook. "I wanted to. But Dad said if you fought it, things would get ugly. He said we needed to make decisions without emotions involved." I stared at her. "Ava, marriage is emotions. Trust is emotional. Loyalty is emotional." She covered her face with her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you." But I didn't respond, because intentions didn't matter anymore. Choices did. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "So, what now? Are you divorcing me?" The question hung in the air like smoke suffocating. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, "Let me ask you something, Ava." She lowered her hands. "What? If your father's plan had worked, and I walked out humiliated today, would you have stopped him?" Her eyes shifted. Her lips trembled, and her silence told me everything. She wouldn't have. She would have watched, maybe even justified it, because somewhere along the way, She stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as someone beneath her father. I stood up slowly. "You should go home, Ava." She panicked. "Ryan, please. Don't shut me out. We can fix." I shook my head. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm giving both of us space to think. Real space. Not manipulation. Not control. Just truth." She wiped her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered. I looked away. I used to believe that. Her breath, caught like that sentence, cut deeper than anything else. She reached for me, but I stepped back, not because I hated her, but because I didn't recognize her anymore. She nodded slowly, defeated, and walked toward the door. Before she opened it, she whispered, "I never thought you'd be capable of something like this." I looked at her calmly. "That's the problem, Ava." I paused. "You never really saw me." She closed the door behind her. The moment she left the room, everything went silent. No voices. No footsteps, just the low hum of the air conditioner. I sat down at my desk and looked around at the life I built, the company I saved, the sacrifices I made, and a strange thought crossed my mind. Sometimes the hardest battles are with the people sitting closest to you. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the pain settle, not to drown in it, but to finally understand it. That was the day I stopped being the quiet man in the background and became the man willing to protect what mattered, even if it meant losing the people who didn't. I didn't sleep at all that night. My mind felt like a noisy room full of broken memories and loud truths I had ignored for too long. I kept replaying everything Beth said. Her voice, her smirk, her certainty that I would quietly disappear. "Dad can push you out any day. It's better if you just step aside. No one needs to know you ever had a role here." That wasn't a fight. That was a plan. But the part that cut deepest wasn't her arrogance. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, I had stopped mattering to the person I married. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a prop, something useful until it wasn't anymore. And now, she thought my expiration date had arrived. The next morning, I got dressed slower than usual, not because I was hesitant, but because I had a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I put on the navy suit Beth used to mock. She'd say, "Why do you always dress like you're going to a funeral? You're invisible already. No outfit can fix that." Funny, because today wasn't a funeral, but something was absolutely going to die. When I arrived at the office, people were whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Some offered sympathetic looks, the kind people give when they know something you don't. My stomach tightened. Something was already happening. As I walked toward the executive floor, I heard someone call my name. It was Emma, a senior engineer who had been with the company since before the buyout. She pulled me aside and whispered, "They're having a board meeting without you. The secretary said you were intentionally removed from the invite list." I felt heat rising through my chest, not panic, not fear. Rage, but I held it back and gave her a small nod. "Thank you. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." She looked confused. Everyone still thought I was just the son-in-law, not the majority owner, not the silent architect, not the one person with the power to end or rebuild everything. I walked toward the conference room, and through the frosted glass I could see them. Beth, her father, Richard, 3 board members, and an HR rep with a termination packet. They weren't even subtle. The moment I stepped inside, every head turned shocked, uncomfortable, cornered. Richard didn't even bother pretending. He leaned back in his leather chair, smirked, and said, "Ah, there he is. Perfect timing." My pulse slowed, not sped up, slowed. Because the moment he spoke, I knew one thing. This wasn't personal for him. This was strategy, control, power, image. Before I could speak, the HR rep slid a folder across the table. "Justin, the executive committee has voted to remove you from all operational roles. We're offering 6 months of severance." Beth cut in, eyes gleaming. "And it's very generous, considering your lack of contribution," Richard added, smug and rehearsed. "It's best for the company." I waited. Silently. My composure made them nervous. Beth crossed her arms. Richard cleared his throat. Finally he asked, "Do you have anything to say before we finalize this?" I smiled, slow, subtle, surgical. "Actually, yes." I reached into my pocket and placed a document on the table. The original ownership agreement. The one Beth forgot existed. The one Richard assumed her charm could nullify. Oliver, my attorney, had walked me through every clause last night, including the most important one. Any decision involving executive removal requires written approval from the majority shareholder. Richard frowned. Beth rolled her eyes. "Justin, seriously, this again? You don't need to make a scene." I tilted my head slightly. "Beth, how much of this company do you think I own?" She scoffed. 6%. Maybe 7? Enough to feel important, not enough to actually be. I turned the document toward them and tapped the number they had both ignored for years. The room froze. Like oxygen had vanished. Beth's face was drained of color. Richard blinked and leaned forward, as if proximity could change reality. That has to be a mistake. I shook my head. No, it's not. Silence. Then Beth yelled, trembling, "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice was calm. Too calm. Because you never cared where I stood, only how far beneath you I stayed. Richard tried to recover his authority. This is unethical. You misrepresented yourself. No, I corrected softly. I simply let you believe what you wanted. Oliver entered, then perfectly timed. He placed a stack of envelopes on the table. These are formal notices. Effective immediately. Several positions are being restructured. He handed one to the HR rep, one to each board member. Then, slowly, deliberately, one to Beth. And finally, one to Richard. Beth ripped hers open like it was an insult. Her voice cracked when she read it aloud. Position eliminated. She looked at me, stunned. You're firing me? Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was small, hollow, frightened. Richard's hands shook as he read his own letter. Justin's son, listen, we can discuss this privately. No, I interrupted gently. You tried to silence me privately. The consequences can happen publicly. Beth stood, eyes wild. You can't do this. I'm your wife. I met her stare. No. You stopped being my wife the moment you decided I was disposable. She stepped forward like she wanted to argue, then stopped, because there was nothing left to say. Richard tried one last appeal, a softer tone, a fake humility. We made mistakes, but we're family. I exhaled, and it wasn't anger leaving my body. It was grief. Family protects, family respects, family doesn't plan your destruction. Security arrived not at my request, but as standard procedure for executive removals. Beth's voice cracked. Please, Justin, can we talk? I shook my head once. Slow. Final. You talked. For months. About replacing me. About erasing me. Now it's my turn. As they were escorted out, employees watched stunned, unsure, whispering. But when Richard stepped into the hallway, someone started clapping. Not loud. Not mocking. Grateful. Then another joint. Then another. Until the entire floor was standing. Not for my revenge, but for the truth finally being seen. I didn't smile. Not yet, because the story wasn't about humiliation. It was about reclaiming everything they tried to steal: my voice, my peace, my identity. And as I walked toward the CEO office, my office, I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I should have stepped into long ago. Respect, leadership, clarity, and most importantly, freedom. For the first time in a long time, the building felt different. Not threatening, not cold, not like a place where I was tolerated. It felt like mine. But as I sat in the CEO chair, the same chair Richard guarded like a throne, a strange heaviness settled over me. This wasn't triumph. It was truth finally catching up. Because the hardest part wasn't confronting them. It was confronting the version of myself who let it go on for so long. That afternoon, I met with department heads. None of them interrupted. None of them dismissed. None of them avoided eye contact. Instead, they listened. Really listened. As I spoke about rebuilding culture, integrity, innovation, things the company had lost under ego and entitlement. When the meeting ended, several of them stayed behind, almost hesitating, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to. Finally, Emma, the engineer from earlier, stepped forward and asked softly, "Was that real? Everything that happened?" I nodded, her eyes filled with relief. Good, because we were all waiting for someone to take the wheel again. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was a compliment, but because it was confirmation. They hadn't needed a ruler, they needed a leader. That night, when I finally left the office, my phone buzzed. 3 messages from Beth. 2 missed calls. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen. Not yet. Healing takes pacing, revenge takes silence, and dignity takes patience. The next morning, I met with Oliver again. "Are you ready for the next step?" he asked. I nodded. "Divorce?" "Yes," I said. "Kind, fair, but final." Because revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about closure, about choosing yourself without apology. Oliver tapped his pen on the folder. "There's something you should know. Beth didn't just disrespect you. She mishandled company funds, personal travel, private shopping, designer purchases, all charged to business accounts." I closed my eyes. A small, tired exhale left my chest. "Press charges?" He shook his head. Not necessary. You own the company. A repayment plan is enough. I smiled weakly. Good. I don't want to destroy her. I just don't want her in my life anymore. And that was the truth. Later that week, I finally agreed to meet with her. Not at a lawyer's office. Not in public. Not in the past. But in a quiet cafe neutral ground. When she arrived, she wasn't the confident, smug woman from before. She looked human, smaller, exhausted, worn down by the weight of losing the illusion of control. She sat across from me, eyes shiny, breathing uneven. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then finally she whispered, "How long have you hated me?" That broke something inside me, not because she said it, but because she believed it. I shook my head. I didn't hate you, Beth. I loved you. I waited for you. I tried to be enough for you. Her jaw trembled. Then why didn't you tell me who you were? What you owned? I breathed slowly. Because I wanted a marriage, not a business arrangement. I wanted love, not leverage. Tears slid down her cheek. I messed up. Yes, I said softly. But not because I was weak. Because you believed I always would be. She swallowed hard. Is there any chance we fix this? There was a time that question would have cracked me open. But now it only felt like a closing door. No, I said gently. We're not meant to be spouses. Maybe not even friends. But we can be respectful strangers. She nodded, crying silently, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel responsible for her emotions. I felt responsible for mine. We signed temporary agreements, discussed logistics calmly, almost politely. No drama, no screaming, just truth finally said out loud. When I left the cafe, the air outside felt crisp against my face, like a reset button, like a beginning, not after the story but because of it. Weeks passed. And slowly, the company changed. The energy, the transparency, the innovation. People didn't walk nervously through halls anymore. They laughed, collaborated, created. It finally felt alive. One afternoon, during an all-staff town hall, one of the younger interns raised his hand and asked, "So, what exactly happened?" The room tensed. Everyone expected a diplomatic answer, but I wasn't interested in reputation. I was interested in truth. So I said, what happened was simple. I forgot my worth, and someone else tried to define it. There was silence. Then I continued, when people think you're quiet, or soft, or unimportant, they mistake it for weakness. But silence isn't a weakness. Sometimes silence is a strategy. Someone in the back whispered, "Wow." I smiled. But the most important part? I didn't take back control to get revenge. I took it back to remember who I was before someone tried to rewrite me. After the meeting, countless employees came up to shake my hand, thank me, tell me the workplace finally felt safe again. Safe. Of all the words, that one meant the most. Sometimes life doesn't break you. Sometimes it teaches you who no longer deserves access to your peace. When I look back now, I don't feel angry. Not toward Beth. Not toward her father. Not toward anyone who tried to replace me in my own story. Instead, I feel gratitude. Because without their betrayal, I would have never learned the difference between being needed and being valued. And maybe, I would have never found the courage to finally choose myself. I didn't win because I had the shares. I didn't win because I had the power. I won because I stopped begging to be respected and decided to respect myself. And now, my life is quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. I wake up and feel proud of the man looking back in the mirror. Not because everything is perfect, but because I finally stopped running from the truth. I stopped proving my worth to people who only wanted to use it. And I learned something that changed everything. Sometimes the people you would have walked through fire for are the ones holding the match. But that doesn't mean the fire destroys you. Sometimes it forges you. So now, as I move forward, I carry one lesson gently. Not every ending is a failure. Some endings are released. Some endings are rebirth. And maybe, just maybe, some endings are the beginning of who you were always meant to become. Before I end this story, let me ask you something from the heart. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to learn they never truly saw your worth? If yes, you're not alone. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you feel understood, take a moment to comment and tell me, which city are you listening from? Your support truly helps this community grow. There are so many more powerful and emotional stories ahead. So, if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because someone else might need this message today.